Crow Country is a game that I did not learn about until it was released back in May. It did not take much for it to capture my interest, though. A passing glance at the launch trailer was all I needed for the game to be put on my to-do list. Crow Country presents itself as a throwback to the PS1 era of survival horror games. Thankfully, it seemed to have enough of its own spin on the genre that I felt like it could be really worthwhile. So let's take a look to see if this ride was as exciting as I believed it could be. Crow Country follows the story of Special Agent Mara Forrest. She arrives at the titular Crow Country theme park in search of the owner of the park, Edward Crow. Crow mysteriously disappeared following the sudden closure of his park 2 years prior to the events of the game. It's not long into Mara's stay at Crow Country before she starts to uncover layer upon layer of the mystery of the park. I actually really enjoyed the story of this game. I think it made an effective use of the different memos and other documents to provide a solid breadcrumb trail to guide the player through the mystery. It also does a good job at introducing questions at a nice pace. For example, one of the things you'll be doing a lot to move forward with the puzzles is inputting a 4-digit code on a keypad. This is relevant because one of the first 4-digit codes you see can't be punched in. The keypads have buttons for numbers 1 through 9. The code in question has a 0 in it. This left me wondering what the use of that code would be for several hours. The game's limited cast was a lot of fun to interact with. Mara is a fun protagonist. Her inner monologue when examining items and scenery throughout the park provides a lot of opportunities for her personality to shine through without it ever undercutting the tension of a given situation. She's certainly not as straight-laced as one might expect a special agent to be. The rest of the cast is entertaining as well. Whether it's Crow's shady business partner, the photographer who was just trying to catch a glimpse of the monsters in the park, or the lawyer that is determined to serve Crow his legal papers, everyone that Mara meets brings an appropriate amount of intrigue or levity to the proceedings. I especially enjoyed all of the memos between the park employees. There was something rather comical about reading the efforts of all of these people just trying to hold together this unraveling park by undergoing tasks that were likely far exceeding their pay grade. As mentioned before, Crow Country is a survival horror game that is styled after the classics of the PS1 era. The nice thing about Crow Country is that despite it clearly being a throwback sort of game, it has a lot of modern sensibilities that keep the game from being overly frustrating. For starters, at first blush, it may look like it has the typical fixed camera pre-rendered backgrounds that you would expect a game like this to have. In reality, you are actually able to move the camera around. Your inventory isn't locked to a set number of 6 to 8 item slots. All of your ammo types get their own stack in the inventory and each have their own limits to how much you can carry. Key items also get their own row, so there's never any frustration in that regard either. Combat manages to be tense without being overbearing or frustrating. Your maximum ammo capacity is not that high, and enemies pop up en masse pretty frequently. The enemies take just enough damage and show up just often enough that the game was able to make me sweat here and there. I was finding ammo pretty frequently, but I felt like I was using it just as often as I was finding it. The actual mechanics of the combat are also a nice spin on things. You have free aiming when you shoot rather than being at the mercy of an auto-lock, and the environment will be constantly dotted with hazards such as bear traps and breaker boxes that you can take advantage of. This puts the onus on the player to be more aware of their surroundings when choosing to engage in combat. I felt myself paying much more attention to things like how I'm positioned when playing this game. Usually in old horror games I would find myself either swinging wildly at most standard enemies if there was a viable melee option, or standing at the edge of my gun's effective range and shooting until I either hear a body drop or need to back up. I only ever died a couple of times, but when I did, it always felt like it was my fault rather than being screwed over by an unfortunate camera angle switch or something of the sort. Crucially, having more control over my fate in the combat did not trivialize the danger I was in throughout the gameplay. The previously mentioned environmental hazards work both ways. Mara is as vulnerable to a bear trap or exploding barrel as one of the monsters that she is fighting. Those aren't the hazards that would give me trouble, though. At around the halfway point, the game starts dropping these crow-shaped poison spitters into the areas. These things, along with the busted chandeliers that started showing up in the interior areas, were probably the main source of damage that I took in the game. The game also had a variety of puzzles for you to solve in order to unlock more of the park. This ranged from the typical find key X by going to this spot and using item Y, but there were plenty of others that involved a bit more thinking. Something I really enjoyed was that quite a few of the puzzles could be bypassed if you are clever enough to spot the shortcut. Crow Country is a very well put together game in regards to the level design. All of the major areas were distinctly themed, and the rooms within those areas also stood apart from one another. It made remembering where I would need to double back to when getting a new code or key item really easy. I only used the map for the occasional reference rather than a navigational crutch. It also led to a lot of organic discovery of the extra collectibles in the game, such as optional weapons, ammo capacity increases, and medkit upgrades. Crow Country has such a cool aesthetic. It perfectly captures the old PS1 block visual style, while bringing the actual visuals forward enough to make it really cool to look at. The setting itself is also incredibly atmospheric. Abandoned theme parks always have a really cool vibe, and I think they're a rather underused setting for horror games, to be honest with you. The sound design in the game is incredible. Many of the creatures you encounter have some kind of distinct noise that they make, which is enough to put you on edge when they aren't in the camera's view yet. The one that stood out the most to me was the wail that the tall, gangly creature would let out anytime they were in the room. The other sounds, such as ominous crow cawing, distorted park ambience, and the squelching of Mara's shoes through puddles of blood, were all bits of noise that I came to appreciate. The game's music was great as well. There were a number of tracks I really enjoyed. The save room theme, the themes for the haunted hilltop and fairy tale land, as well as a particularly moving song near the end of the game, were all standouts to me. Crow Country is a gem of an indie horror game. It is an easy must-play if you like horror games or are feeling particularly fatigued by the AAA space's approach to the genre. And despite its presentation as a throwback to the previous era of horror games, I would say it has enough modern sensibilities to be approachable for someone's first foray into the genre. And as of the time of writing, the game has a hard mode for anyone who thinks that all of the game's more modern sensibilities would make it too easy. I think most importantly, despite the fact that Crow Country clearly calls back to genre classics, it feels distinctly like its own thing. It takes a lot of previously used horror elements and still manages to make its own unique flavor out of them. The gameplay and story provide a fun and foreboding ride through a truly excellent setting to create an experience that I will continue to think about and probably return to sooner rather than later.